Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Family Matters Research Group Interactive Series, PSP Family Support. How can organizations get involved? Slide, please. So my name is Carrie Lynn. I'm a former PSP and now a knowledge translator with CIPCERT. I haven't met many of you, but thank you for being here today. I am located on Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 territories, the ancestral lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota nations, and homeland of the Métis. Slide, please. Just a few housekeeping notes. All attendees are in listen-only mode, so just to limit background noise, and the cameras are also off. Today's session is being recorded, and a link to view the recording will automatically be sent to your email address. There will be time for questions at the end of the session, so please type your questions into the question box at any time throughout the webinar. Slide, please. So to access real-time English captioning of this webinar, please use the link in the chat, which will be directed to Wordly, a translation and captioning service. Please be sure to keep Wordly open, the Wordly window open, and select English at the top of your window. And slide, please. This is a disclaimer. You can have a look at this. I won't read it all out to you. Excuse me. Great, and slide, please. So CIPCERT, the Canadian Institute for Public Safety Research and Treatment, is hosting a two-day symposium this March to showcase research outcomes and related national efforts in supports of first responders and public safety personnel, mental health and well-being. So presented by public safety personnel alongside some invited national consortium researchers and other CIPCERT network members. This event is designed to rapidly disseminate reliable solutions and enhance the well-being of public safety personnel, their leaders, and their families. So thank you. I will now turn it over to Heidi.
Thanks so much, Carrie Lynn, and thanks to CIPCERT for hosting our interactive series again on its platform. I'm Heidi Cram. I'm the research lead for the Families Matter Research Group, and it's my great pleasure here today to be able to showcase Rachel Richmond's work. So Rachel is one of my doctoral students, and she's been working on this for the past 3 years to really bring things forward around how organizations can move into a more families forward space in terms of their programs, policies, and supports. So we're really excited to be at this space. So we can go to the next slide, Rachel. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a history, a bit of context about how we got here. So a couple of years ago, I and a team of my wonderful collaborators and co-investigators were funded through a team grant by CHR, and we called that Home Base. And in this grant, we actually had 3 lines of activity. And these 3 lines of activity have really developed over the past couple of years. So one thing was really to focus on what do we know and understand about what's going on for public safety families. You know, in 2020, when the pandemic started, we knew so little about what was going on for public safety families, and we had a lot of concerns about how the impacts of COVID might actually amplify some of the challenges that public safety families would be experiencing. And so we really dug in because it was a really hard time to start looking at doing all this work during the pandemic to really understand what was known and build a really solid conceptual frame. So how could we actually work to develop things that definitely respond to the tailored needs of public safety families? We couldn't presume that they were like military families, although we had a lot of work that helped us understand what military families' experiences are like. We were like, is it the same? Is it the different? You know, how same, how different? And so we've really been able to pull out an entire new conceptual framework that helps guide the work that we do. And one of those things is to really look that families have a shared experience of a number of different dimensions that are unique because they all load on all at the same time. So we know that families have risks related to their loved ones being on the job. We know that they have a significant logistical challenge. We know that mobility can be an exceptional type of that logistical challenge. And we also know that they can feel out of sync with their community and have complex issues related to identities as they try to navigate that space of feeling like I'm in the community, but my family works differently, and there are different demands of my family, and feeling kind of socially isolated at times. During the pandemic, we actually were very fortunate to have funding from the Public Health Agency of Canada, which really accelerated this particular strand of our work. And we were able to create an online well-being hub called PSP Families. So that is open, available. It'll be fully translated into French and released, I think, by the end of this month. And that's got a significant amount of knowledge and skill building supports, as well as the spouse and significant other well-being course. So we've come a long way on this particular column of the work. We've also done a lot of work around the families network, because one of the things that we know about the public safety families is that they aren't naturally connected. There's no infrastructure like there might be with military families, where there's the Military Family Resource Center. Here, we needed to actually build something from scratch. And Lisa Delaney is our community development manager for what has become Garnet Families. And we've really elevated the visibility of families who have these shared experiences and really work to connect them, but also those who study, serve, and support them. And central to this, of course, are the organizations themselves. One of the things that we have found through our journey through this process is that one of the first places that the families will go to is the organizations. And they'll say, I need this, I need that. Do you have this? Do you have that? And that this puts a lot of pressure on organizations to figure out, well, how do we respond to families? What do we offer to families? And how do we actually figure out what families need? And how do we know what works for families? And what can I do in my little department? How do we understand this? So this is where Rachel's been really heading up a lot of this work to try and bring this whole work forward as we move towards a Families Forward toolkit for public safety organizations to really help folks understand, where am I at, where am I going, what are my priorities, and what does my community of families need? Okay, next slide, Rachel, please. So one of the things, this is already out. So Rachel is first author on this, and really looking at the issue for organizations in a lot of ways when we looked at the literature to see what's going on here for organizations and where and how are families located. So what does that look like when we put all those lifestyle dimensions in the pot, stir it up, what's going on? And one of the things that really comes to the fore is how important issues of recruitment and retention are for organizations in relation to families. We tend to have this kind of idea that you've got work and you've got family. When you have 24/7 jobs, that work family is always in some sort of natural tension. There are natural conflicts that will happen when you have jobs that are 24/7. And so being able to recognize that those conflicts are inherent to the job and help to prepare people for those challenges is some of what we're trying to do with PSP Families. When we think about work-family conflict, though, from an organizational perspective, how does families actually become elevated to an action item, a priority in an organization from a strategic and operational level? And it really does come down to issues related to retention and recruitment. If you have challenges with the work that pull the family in a way that the family can't manage the demands of the job, then the family may kind of win that battle. And there's this idea that both are greedy institutions and they both want all of you. But obviously they can't have all of you because there's only one of you as the worker. Okay, next slide, please. So this is where I'm going to hand over now to Rachel for her to give you some high-level information about what her process has been and where we are in the process of getting to that toolkit. So thank you. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you. So we've come quite a long ways, as Heidi has described. So what I really want to get into is this component here. So what I did in order to get at what organizations are doing was I spoke to 15 family champions across sectors to see how they started, what their processes were, and really just to get it down into what can other organizations do in order to move more family forward. So between July and November, I conducted these 15 interviews, and I used critical incident and narrative analysis in order to collect and analyze them. So the fun bit is, what did we find? So first, I want to talk about readiness. So when I talk about readiness, I'm talking about an acknowledgement of a need, a willingness to act. So this is that individual champion seeing that need, acknowledging it, and then wanting to do something about it. And also having a receptive audience. All of those things together, those are the conditions that align to a high level of readiness. We can also have different levels of readiness, and that's a good thing to keep in mind as well. So that all comes together with, you can have a lot of readiness, but resources are also important. And so when I talk about resources, I'm talking about funding, having the personnel in order to do whatever it is, materials, access, support. And so all of that sounds quite abstract. So I want to show you a little bit about how this can work together. So with low amounts of readiness and resources, you can still do things. That doesn't mean that initiatives won't be able to occur. It's just the type of initiative could change depending on where your community is and at with your resources and readiness. So social celebrations, and I'll describe what those are in a moment, require less readiness and resources than, for example, socialization, which I will talk about again in a moment, and then building awareness and skills, which requires a little bit more resources and readiness. So keeping in mind what the resources and readiness of your community are is quite critical. So let's get into what I think is the most fun finding that I found, which are these categories of initiatives. So we found some social celebrations that have been occurring, socialization, so that's what it is to be on the job, and some building awareness and skills. So I put them here in embedded circles to show you that you're not only going to do one. Organizations can do multiple of these, and they are also fully rotating circles. So just because you conducted a social celebration doesn't mean you're never going to conduct another one again, and the same with the other categories as well. We consider this sort of the drop in the bucket component. Any little thing that's done in order to be family forward from an organization perspective is another step forward. Just because it might feel smaller doesn't mean it is. Every little drop adds up to something bigger. So breaking down what these can look like, we're going to put it on a bit of a scale from low formality to high formality. So some social celebration events could be holiday events. You could have a Christmas party, family fun days, barbecues, different ways of getting the whole family in. So that often involves full families. So that's your chosen family. So it could be friends, could be parents, spouses, children, etc. Anything to just have that social celebration, this festive component. We move on to slightly formal, where we get into socialization. So this is really what it is to be socialized, to be on the job. And so some of examples of these initiatives have been graduation events. So the last day, perhaps, of a graduation event, the family is invited in order to, you'll see celebration components in this event. But it's also, they'll have some sort of talks or some way of demonstrating what it is to be part of that PSP family. Also, new recruit events is another way of getting those families in and seeing or learning about what that family is going to go through now that they are a PSP family. That's backwards. On the most formal side, this is having some building awareness or skills sort of event. And so this could be targeted as a suicide prevention training event, some sort of occupational stress injury awareness component. Typically, these events or initiatives are run when a need is noticed in a community. So that's the most formal component of these three initiatives. And it's not saying that one is more important than the other. They're all equally important. It really just comes down to the goals, functions, and outcomes of the community and of the organization. Let's get down into what some of those goals, functions, and outcomes are and could be. So for social celebrations, these tend to build relationships, give room for informal networking, so families meeting other families in an informal, low-pressure environment. Often it is a good way for organizations to access the families instead of always going through the public safety personnel themselves, for example. It's also a way of normalizing the people and the workspace and demystifying it from media, for example. As I previously stated, this targets the whole family, bringing in children, parents, selected chosen family as well. It can also be used for passive information sharing and also builds trust. So the next is the socialization, really just what it is to be on the job. And so this is sometimes involves some formal networking, meeting leadership, understanding who the go-tos are, what supports are available for the public safety personnel themselves, what resources are available for the families, also working on building that trust and normalizing some of those behaviors and understanding the risks and requirements of the job to ensure that the family and the public safety personnel are on the same page. The last category is building awareness and skills. And so this could be used also for formal networking and creating those connections, as well as targeting specific needs of the community, normalizing the experiences of families going through different situations, and really emphasizing supports and available programs, as well as building continuous trust. And these often happen at the same time and throughout the year. So what I want to show you is a few pathways that we have put together based off multiple interviews that I've conducted. So this is not the pathway of one organization, but emergent findings and emergent patterns that have come out of my research that we wanted to share with you. Really emphasizing that you'll see organizations can enter into these pathways in a variety of ways, and it really is a choose your own adventure of what your organization and your community needs and is ready for. So in this pathway, it is an exemplar from Urban Police. And so in these pathway, there's a need that comes out of either someone's personal experience or a proximal experience, so the experiences of a colleague, and a need of all family-based initiatives arose. From there, some seeking occurred, and they found that leadership advocated for this shift towards family-based initiatives and family-friendly culture. Through this shift in this pathway, events began with an annual family fun day. So this was focusing on the social component, celebratory, full family involvement in order to get the family in and have those informal networks. After that, in this pathway, education nights ended up being brought in, noticing that there was a need in the community and that the right amount of readiness existed in the organizations to put on occupational stress, putting on OSI type events, awareness, and perhaps some skill building for families in order to fully encompass and understand and work with the need that they saw in multitude in all of these communities. After that, it was noticed that an orientation process could be useful for this pathway. And so bringing families in at the end of graduation and having that discussion on what it would look like now that these families would be new to the police sector and understanding their role and being socialized into that role. All of these programs occurred and they received feedback, revised and improved, and occurred perhaps more frequently, and all the feedback was implemented. While the cycle was occurring and everything was going well, unfortunately, some things did come in the way. COVID provided a large barrier to a lot of the programs that occurred and were seen along this pathway. But it wasn't solely a barrier. It also offered a new ways for organizations in this pathway to reach families. Different strategies were implemented in order to access these families during the pandemic, and it actually acted as a facilitator in order to come up with new and unique ways. And so this recurring cycle kept happening again and kept improving. So another pathway, Pathway B, this is based on rural fire. So a catalyst occurred in which families required support and education. Along this pathway, it was determined that holiday celebrations as a rural community would often come together in order to conduct these was a great starting point. From there, adding in family training days in order for families to understand and see what their firefighters were actually doing on a day-to-day basis to demystify were implemented. And then a family resource hub was needed in order to address some of the issues that were arising in these types of communities. So this is a pathway that can occur. From there, each of these events was received feedback, revised and improved, and it's a cyclical process. Not each event didn't stop after it was completed, and were often run more than once. Last pathway I'm going to share with you is based on urban paramedics. So again, a family support and education was noticed as a need in that catalyst. Here, many did not have formal supports, and so some were developed. From there, family days and that social component was started in order to gauge impressions of the community. From there, an orientation process was added in, so that graduation process of bringing the family in, and then education as to target specific needs of the communities. From there, again, that same feedback loop, and unfortunately, COVID hit as well and caused a barrier here. But again, it was not a full barrier as many facilitators came out of this pathway. You may notice that many of these pathways look quite similar, but the way in which people enter, so the way in which different organizations and communities entered into this circular pathway differed, and the events themselves varied significantly. So one of the main things that I want all of you to hear and understand from this is that these emergent patterns and findings are dynamic. They're non-linear, typically, as that circle continues to move, and that different pathways have emerged due to different resources and readiness combinations. So you'll have seen in the police that a high level of resource and readiness happened to exist in the pathway that I presented, And so education nights were conducted prior to any sort of socialization type of initiative. Whereas in the other pathways that I demonstrated, this was not the case. As always, future research needs to be conducted, and due to the way that I did conduct this research, we actually don't know at the moment how families experience these pathways, and so that's coming next. But what I want to ask of you now is we need more focused feedback on content and format. So we want to know from you, how do we make these pathways more fruitful? Which leads me into a fun request, which is we need feedback to refine and make this toolkit useful for other organizations and people like yourselves. And so I'm hosting 3 focus groups. So I'm hosting one for leadership, which we're calling our chiefs and champions, one for public safety personnel of all sectors, and one for families themselves, as we want to know how all of this resonates with each group. So this is my personal ask. If you are interested, I will ask that you write down what time for your category, the one that applies to you, and then send me an email, and I'm happy to discuss this with you further on how you can get involved and send you letters of information and consent and all of that kind of stuff. So now I'm going to pass it back to Heidi briefly.
Thanks so much, Rachel. I'm wondering if you can go back 2 slides. There's a question there that while the focus groups are really important and we want to hear from you in more depth, we do want to have some conversation now about how we actually can think about these pathways and making them, more effective, more, there's just so many questions we have. So we open the conversation up to questions from our registrants and to see if we can kind of dig into it a little bit more. And while I wait for some questions to appear, I do think that, Rachel's done a really nice job of being able to show that the entry into these kinds of initiatives is different and that people come to those pathways for different reasons. If you're one of the, chiefs, leaders, champions, if you're a public safety personnel or a family member on the call today, if you think about, how it might be different for your sector in your region than other sectors in your region, or how things might differ from community to community, there's so much variation. So that readiness and resource component is pretty important. But being able to think about what's possible, because everyone is going to start from somewhere. We kind of go back to that that question that we've been asking, what about the families? Where people kind of enter into this, well, what about the families? Like, what's families got to do with me? I'm an employer. Why do I have to think about families? Why should I think about families? And so that recruitment and retention business really comes up on the why. And then it goes all the way to, we need to help families understand how to better support our public safety personnel. That's absolutely a focus of some of the initiatives. What to look out for in case people are struggling, what are some signs and symptoms of some difficulties that people might be having. And then there's the other category of like, what do families themselves need in their own right? So you have these different places where people start, and then the initiatives can reflect some of those starting places. And this is also where Rachel and I can only see each other, so we can't see anyone else. So we don't know what's happening behind the scenes for people as they, ponder these questions, but we're here to have a conversation. So someone throw us a bone, please.
I also know I just threw a lot of information at you, and I tried to go quick to ensure that there was time for discussion, because this is our bread and butter, is the discussion portion. So I am not offended at all if this is confusing, because I did go quite quickly. Yes. I also can talk about this all day. So, I mean, no one has a question. I can keep going.
Well, okay, so maybe you and I are having a conversation, people are going to listen to it. We'll see. We welcome questions.
Love it.
But when you think about, like, you know, you've been able to find and talk to 15 people who have had that spark where they've had some kind of personal experience, or they've seen that personal experience in people who are close to them, that really kind of, you know, something needs to happen here. So that's great. We know that people don't always have formal structures to do that job. So sometimes this is, well, not sometimes, often this starts in a very side of desk kind of way. And that public safety personnel are quite busy. And the leaders, people who are taking on leadership, whether it's small L leadership of like, I'm going to take this on, or someone who's got a formal leadership role, we're asking a lot of them. So when you think about what seems to have been most successful from those leading the initiatives, what's your sense of what's landing well for folks?
Yeah, that's a great start, actually. What often would occur is that catalyst moment that we were talking about, someone's experience or someone's colleague's experience would just kind of click, and they would say, you know what, we really need this. And someone would say, I can take that on. And it's on that side of desk. Typically, it would be from a formal role or something that did exist, whether it was a volunteer role or not. So let's say someone was a peer support person. They would find ways in order to incorporate the family into what they were already doing. So nothing started from scratch. Often some sort of social component already existed. They would just make it more family friendly. Or they would have passive information sharing that would occur now at this thing that was an easier way for them to do something. Now, those small components that someone might think is small is actually really, really big step. Especially if those things are already in place, adding a tiny family focus makes a very large difference in communities. And one of the things that came up over and over and over again was the response that these people saw from what they thought was a small change was overwhelmingly positive. So what I really want to emphasize is any change, any small thing that you can do has exponential potential.
Well, and I think that that's an important point, because some of these incremental activities start to build that sense of trust and responsivity. And things might be small, but it's, feels like that drop in the bucket, but it's really planting a seed. And one of the things that we saw across the different categories is that one of the functions that these events or initiatives really serve is to build that trust. Families aren't sure where to go. Families aren't sure, how to engage with the organizations. If they have concerns, they're not used to the kind of more upstream, how do I prepare myself for dealing with the demands of the job and how those demands change across a family's life cycle, which they do. So this idea of you knew what you signed up for, well, I mean, you may have thought you did, but those things change as your family changes, as the family and their own work situations change with the other family members. So there's lots to consider. I'm wondering if there are any family members registered who might put some info. I don't see anything in the chat. If you've had any experience with any of the family forward initiatives or events, and any feedback on, what things work for which people, because you may have gone something that could have been great for somebody else, but wasn't kind of your thing. people do respond to different things, and some people really like the social celebrations, and other people don't really feel the need for them. So the question, we've got a question. Oh, okay, sorry. All right. So there are some questions coming into the chat. Let's see. Okay. What is your working definition of a family?
So that's an excellent question. So I've been going with the chosen family. And so this is whoever you deem as your family. If your family is your parents, excellent. If your family is your best friend, your roommate, whoever is the one that supports you and that you feel supported by, anyone that you feel is impacted by your life could be your family. We leave it open, limiting it to just a spouse or a child. Some of the feedback that different champions even received was based on how their structures worked. They may have started out with just it being spouse focused, and then feedback overwhelmingly said they needed more. And so we are including as much family and whoever is there to support you, let them understand.
Absolutely, and that could be even like your roommate, like who you're living with now. If you think about the people when they start, they may be singles, and they may be living at home even, and their parents are the ones who are supporting them and trying to get their heads around, like, what does it mean beyond the job? And I know that when we really looked at developing PSP Net families, we wanted to make sure that it also was inclusive of parents, siblings, adult children, that there is a life cycle piece here as well. So we've tried to be very inclusive, broadly speaking, but I'm not sure that all the events are, when we go into that formality, where it goes more and more formal, what we tend to see is that it becomes less open. So that's a conversation that we can continue to have with folks about, tips and tricks and lessons learned, is that the broader, more inclusive thing for these open events is helpful. Okay, so the next question, as someone working in psychological support of PSP, do I have a way to join the online platform for PSP families? So I'll take this question, Rachel, because there's kind of two parts to this. One is certainly Garnet Families, and the Garnet Families Network is where we're trying to create a hub for public safety families, defense families, and those who study, serve, and support them, to have one coordinated kind of hub around the research that's coming out for families, for people who are doing psychological support. And certainly the PSP Net Families platform is open for you to refer any of your PSP families to. Have you engaged with the Canadian Fire Chiefs Association? So we have done work with the CAFC. We actually did a companion event with them and talked to the spouses of chiefs at their last event in September, and are actively working in a couple of collaborative ways. But if you've got something particular, please email me. I'd love to hear more. Or the unions of these groups. So these are some broader questions, Rachel. So part of the Garnet Families Network is also the development of a national and actually international partnership. And we are trying to work with people at the chief level, people at the union level, the service providers, and the researchers, to create one big coordinated group that puts families forward. And because really, when you're in an occupational sector, it makes a lot of sense that people are going to focus on the people who are doing the work. So we're saying, okay, we're going to focus on the families, and you'll be able to benefit from that. So if you or your organization, there's going to be information at the end of the slides around how to sign up for the newsletter to keep abreast of all the things that we're doing, and which events we'll be going to as speakers. Carrie Lynn had mentioned the CIPSERT Symposium that is coming on in March. I'll be talking at that with a family champion, which will be lovely. We're excited. Okay. All right, we have a deputy fire chief, partner to deputy fire chief. She runs, hi Andrea, she runs a partner support program, and her greatest barrier is finding funding to bring in training that fit in the largest, most formal sphere. So looking for grants, writing them in evenings and weekends. Well, thank you, Andrea, for your dedication around that. What I can say is that we're working hard, and we had the benefit of the funding through the Public Health Agency of Canada to create the PSP Net Families platform, which is free to use, open and available, and that Lisa and I do all kinds of virtual events, and we're trying to build up our national capacity to do more regionally based speakers, and that we don't charge for our time. So that I can tell you. But bringing in the more specific training as you get into that more and more formal, that is a challenge to be able to find. And one of the things that we're hoping with the partnership is to make that process about what's coming down the pipeline a little bit easier for people to access, and to really work with trying to do that, and being able. One of the things one of the other questions that's coming up is, having access to discounting training opportunities. So one of the things that we're on the other side when we go to public safety events, like, we're not a vendor, we're not selling anything. We just want to go and participate and share information about what our groups are doing. So it's an interesting piece to try and frame what our role is, and then how you might access discounted training opportunities. Those are questions for our service provider community who might be providing more specific training, but I'd be happy to speak to you offline, Andrea. Okay, this one's back to you, Rachel. How do you gauge readiness?
So in the interviews that I was conducting, readiness wasn't a measure that was, it wasn't anything that was actually measured quantitatively by that point. It was more just around discussions that they were having with their communities around, was the organization and leadership ready for this? Was the community ready for certain things? And so trust, for example, which can be measured, is a big component in readiness. And so if there wasn't lots of trust, doing social celebration type events was a lot easier to get family to attend than hosting a suicide prevention type of event where perhaps that trust wasn't there. So gauging readiness wasn't quite quantitatively measured at this point, but we can also provide in our toolkit with ways that you can measure all of these things. So coming soon.
Yeah, and just to add to that, in terms of the readiness, I guess one of the things you do a bit of a reverse engineering is you see people try to start things and there's no kind of appetite for in the organization. Like the organization, the conditions are not right. So when we think about readiness, we're thinking about what conditions need to be in place for things to go forward, for there to be uptake. Because like another question here is, why are some of these things abandoned? And some of that is really, that's what we're trying to tease out, is what are the different conditions that need to be in place. And you need to have a champion, you need to have some element of resource commitment, there's some sort of structural component that seems to allow things to move forward. If you only have one of those things, it doesn't go. So the readiness is, maybe it's, it's about the combination of those conditions. So I think that's a really, all of these questions are really good. Okay, so another question is, has this been presented at the training level, like in pre-service? And this is our ideal, is to be able to get in there. And one of the things that Lisa's been doing at the Ontario Police College is to actually be able to present that information around, as people are graduating from those classes, to give them and their families that information right from the outset as they're cresting in. And so I think that those are really important to be able to do. Okay, next we've got want to create some discussion about, we learned about the study and how to prevent spillover from OSIs to the families and how to communicate appropriately to your supports. Yes, so that is a really important content area. So Rachel, I'm wondering if you saw anything in the initiatives, that people were dealing with that. I can speak to from the PSP Net families as well, but I'm wondering if this came up in your data.
Yeah, sorry. So do you mind just repeating the question?
The spillover. How do you talk about and prevent spillover around, the OSIs to the family, and how to communicate appropriately to your supports? So that part that's more of an interpretation. That's what it's written, but I'm thinking it's how do you talk about OSIs and families and the impacts on families? Has that come up as a specific targeted initiative?
More than once, which is why I'm happy to talk about it. Multiple times, along the education nights targeted themselves around OSIs. And so ways in which they were conducted, often some sort of expert relating to OSIs, so some sort of psychologist was brought in. But in addition to that, the ones where overwhelming positive feedback which were reported had also people with lived experience talking about it, both from the PSP side as well as the family side. Often that pairing, discussing how it worked for them both. Getting themselves on the same page with the same sort of communication was key. And so sharing that and really normalizing those behaviors for those communities was extremely beneficial, or at least said to be extremely beneficial. Again, we didn't measure this on an individual case basis, but yeah, it was targeting it from a number of perspectives, understanding what the OSI was, so that cognitive component, as well as understanding really just how it feels and how to move through it, and those different techniques. So yeah, we've seen a lot of education nights relating to that. It's quite prominent.
Yeah, and one thing that's, a really nuanced issue when it comes to OSI and spillover in the families is that there can be this kind of this idea that families are the first responders to the first responder. And I just want to raise that that's an area of some concern for us when we think about the families themselves, because those issues mean that the families become quite responsibilized for detecting, intervening. Spouses, family members should not be psychologists to their loved ones. There's a balance between like noticing, detecting, and then, how to access supports rather than feeling like you're supposed to be the support, you're supposed to do the intervention. And so that can really take a toll on families. So we think about there are impacts of OSIs when people live with OSIs. We look at OSIs or operational stress injuries really from kind of more an ecological perspective, like it affects the whole family. And so what affects the public safety personnel will affect the family, and how well the family's doing will affect the public safety personnel. So there is this bidirectional impact that we have to really be mindful of, because this separation of like work and family is a bit of a false one, because they do spill over into one another. So I think that those are, I hope that speaks to your issue, your question. Okay, the next question is, what can healthcare practitioners do to facilitate the use of these resources by PSP and families? Would PSP and families be more or less reluctant to use these e-resources if they are shared by employers versus healthcare peer researchers, etc.? Well, that's a huge question. And really what we're trying to do at this point is get the word out about resources at all. So if you think about, a year ago, well, we've had PSP Net families for a whole year, like fully formed, not yet translated, but the translation is coming. There hasn't been a thing that really responds to families as families. Most of the service provision that is there is based around families who are not doing well already. So families who've already experienced a lot of impact of risk. And so one of the things that we're trying to look at is family life and how to keep families as whole families well, and to try and kind of build that back upstream. And I think that this is where the Garnet Families Network comes in to try and give broader reach. And also there's a reality that some people will, avail of things because they come from the organization, and some people won't because they come from the organization. So we need to have a diversified way, and it really is like a collective responsibility to keep the families well. Wondering, Rachel, if anything came up in your data around access or perception of pathways.
Yeah, I actually really like this question. In addition to the others, they're all lovely. A big thing that came up in quite a few of my interviews was needing practitioners and healthcare providers that have some sort of understanding of the PSP world and of the PSP family world. And so just really having that just like kind of core competencies in order to understand what's occurring, what these experiences are, so that families or public personnel don't have to go through all of that background information and can just get to their point. That was actually a barrier for a lot of people accessing supports in this case. And so some initiatives were actually put together in order to find practitioners that were aware of these core competencies, and they ensured that a separation existed, a professional separation, so that the names of these people were perhaps put on a website or disseminated at some of these passive events, in order that families and public safety personnel knew who they were, but did not have to go through the organization in order to get access to these people that have been, for lack of a better term, vetted by the organization, sort of. Well, by members of the community, I would say. So yeah, this is a big one. And so one of the biggest things I could say for healthcare providers, building up these core competencies of understanding these experiences, and then putting yourselves out there to the community so that they know you exist.
Absolutely. And I think part of the question there's quite a number of questions here, and I'm trying to get to them all, just mindful of time. But one of the things that's come up related to that question is about how to access the families. And this is one of the biggest issues, is that there is no real direct channel to the families. That's why we created this network, to try and actually create a safe space that is kind of separate from the employer, but works with all the employers to try and think about how we could connect families to one another. One of the things that we think about when we connect families, and this concept of Garnet is really used to give some neutrality around, all the different occupational sectors. Like, there's so many of them that we're trying to think about when we think about these lifestyle dimensions of risk, identities, mobility, and logistics. And those occupational lifestyle dimensions really anchor the shared experience. And the Garnet is a symbol of love, loyalty, and safe return to family. So this is really where we come from, the Garnet Families Network perspective, and through partnership with the community and the service providers, the researchers, the government collaborators, the research hubs and research institutes, to try and create a path, a hub for families. Okay, I think we have time maybe for one more question. So Josie from, is that York Regional Police Association? So Josie, I don't know how to engage you into the conversation directly here technically, but if you wanted to add in a comment around grants in the chat, that would be great. I'm sure people will be interested to hear what you've got. Okay, and so Rachel, can you take me forward a couple of slides and we'll just see what else we have to orient folks to? Okay, so, back one, back two, sorry. This is the joy of the, okay. So you can see that there's a lot that we're trying to sort out. So we do want to have these focus groups. So I'll be supporting Rachel in these focus groups. These are conversations. We have some questions about like trying to figure out how to bridge from our findings into, you know, that kind of toolkit where people might be able to say, well, this is where I'm at. These are the conditions I currently have. What is the ability now for us to move forward? How do we move forward? What are the expectations? You know, from my organization, from the families, how do the families experience these things? You know, we need to understand that better. So, you know, we would love for you to be able to join in with one of these conversations. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, the technology. We have launched our updated website around Garnet families. It's still in a state of construction. Not all the pages are there, but you will start to see where we're going with this. And so really trying to build that spot for people to be able to come to say, okay, you know, I'm an organization, I'm a chief, I'm, you know, part of the occupational health and safety team in the union, I'm a family member, I'm a public safety personnel who actually, you know, is a member of his or her own family and wants to understand how to keep my family well. You know, everybody's welcome here. We have the website, but we also have the Family Ties newsletter, and we do these events every 3 months. We have a new virtual event that comes from issues that we are hearing from the community. And Lisa Delaney is usually here to speak to that, but she's at an event. So, you know, she couldn't be here. But those are the kinds of things that we're trying to really get out and get to know folks in the community and get connected to one another. Next slide, please. So these are a couple of things that we know of that are coming up. So certainly CIBCERT's symposium. We know that TEMA is having their Ontario Education Day. The Ontario First Responders Mental Health Conference is coming up. We're going to be doing a families roundtable at that event in case you are coming to that in May. We're going to be having a more face-to-face, in-person discussion about like how to build out the supports and service pathways for families. If your organization, you know, wants to get connected into this, you know, want to share your information, let us know. We want to get the information out to everybody within the Garnet Families Network. Next slide, please. No more slides. Look at that. Well then, oh no, is there another one at the end, or is that where we're staying?
There is no others. I'm just shamelessly promoting the fact that we require assistance. Please assist us in helping.
We do. Help us get to the next stage. So culturally competent practice is so important. And that is one of the things that we are currently also building, is that kind of for trauma exposed professionals, what is the family complement for trauma exposed professionals? There's a lot of work that we're doing that's happening behind the scenes. The newsletter and the websites are going to be the easiest way for you to keep abreast of the new bits. Please reach out to me, heidi.graham@queensu.ca. If you have general questions, I can get you connected with Lisa around events, community development. But we would love for you to join me and Rachel at any of these upcoming focus groups where we can actually, and there's Fred making an appearance. I was wondering when the dogs are going to appear. So thank you very much. Last words to you, Rachel.
Thank you all for coming, and please reach out to us. We know we will yell that families matter from the top of our lungs until people start listening to us, and then we will keep yelling. And we'd love if you would be part of that conversation with us. Thank you all.
Thank you. Oh, please complete the post survey.
Yes.
That would be the other bit. Yes. Thank you.